Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Peter here. You're somebody that got into writing really early on as a journalist, worked your way all the way into a lot of different roles. One of which was being involved in the Merv Griffin show. You had a bestseller. You won an Emmy. You were the youngest person to win an Emmy at the time for being a producer there. And you took your talents and really created your own idea with High School Musical based on your family and it got approved and it changed the lives of so many people, brought a lot of joy to people. So I'm excited to get into your story, Peter, and to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here, and I'm exhausted listening to my history. So it's it's interesting, but you're correct. I did start writing very young age because when I was in high school, I actually had a job covering rock and roll in San Francisco, and it was the late 1960s, early 70s. It was the greatest job for a high school kid in history because it was like that
Yeah.
movie Almost Famous, and I had tickets for
Mhm.
everything, this and that. And there were no rules back then. Today, if a young person like yourself or, someone else wants to go get a job at a newspaper, get a job anywhere, there's 8 million hurdles to jump. I was 15 and you walk in and say, well, I think you guys don't have this. Can I try this? Okay. So the barriers to
Mhm.
entry were much less. Your generation has the advantage of technology that we didn't have. You can do stuff like you're doing right now that we didn't even conceive of, but we sort of had the advantage of a loose environment. But it wasn't, it was an interesting way. Newspapers, back when they existed, were a great way to learn writing and learn discipline. My first editor of a newspaper back there, he had a gun and a bottle of whiskey in his desk, you know, and he said, get the story right because I got a date tonight, and if you make me late, I'm going to shoot you. So that was a good little discipline to start with. But that's
so,
where it started. Yeah.
so where did this kind of passion for writing for entertainment begin? Was it something that you just saw some sort of work and you're like, hey, I want to be able to create my own thing like this, or you saw an article somewhere? Like, what was kind of the first inspiration?
It's interesting because I was always a reader, and so you have to have some people along the way that give you a nudge. And when I was a freshman in high school, I remember writing a paper, and this one teacher gave me a lot of encouragement about it, and I go, oh, maybe I could do that, you know, and so I think it was in reading that got me interested. And it also, like a lot of people in creative arts and everything, I spent a lot of time I was a weird mix of just being a jock, playing basketball, and then wanting time by myself to daydream. And sometimes you bump into things in life. And when you start writing, you can say, oh, I could make up my own version of reality, and
Huh.
that's better. In your own version of reality, you get the girl you wanted, whereas in other versions of reality you might not. But so I really think that getting some encouragement from having early writing was a big deal. And having that sort of mentor, even just the right kick in the ass at the right time, is something I think we all need. And I got it early, so I kept going. I kept going.
So you wound up going to college. You went to the University of California. You got a creative writing
Yeah.
degree. I mean, how important, Peter, do you think getting this creative writing degree was? Like, did you just learn so much that really helped you become a much better writer and a better storyteller? Like, how impactful was it versus kind of like your other
Yeah.
experience?
For me, it was good because at UC Santa Cruz, when I was there, there were a lot of well-known writers who wanted to retire to the Santa Cruz area. And so they would teach one class. And so you really got to meet people who are actually doing it, just like you're doing with your podcast. When you meet people who've actually done it as opposed to theory, that's encouraging. I say to writers, I mean, the creative writing thing, there are people who've come out of creative writing workshops and things who do great, and others who never went near it from 1,000 miles. I would say learn how to learn. If what college is you learn how to learn. If you need to find out something, how do you do it? How do you go about it? How can you find the right people to help you? And that's, when I talk to young writers, and I'd say one thing, I was a very shy person. Most writers, they're not stand-up comics. They're not out there pushing. But I found I could get, when you just ask people, you find someone who's doing what you want to do and talk to them. It's amazing how many people want to
Yeah.
talk to you, you know, and that is, and it sounds simplistic, and most people will say, well, what am I going to do? Call up Steven Spielberg and ask him. You might, you know, I wrote letters to writers, people that I was interested in, and I got responses, you know, and it was very interesting. And when I started working in television, which I did by accident, because when I was in college, I was writing a column for a newspaper on popular music, and someone who played tennis at the club up in Monterey Bay Area where I was working worked in Hollywood for Merv Griffin's company, which was a talk show, the original Oprah kind of show. And he said, "Are you the same guy that writes the newspaper?" And I said, "Well, how many Barsocchinis do you think are running around?" And they offered me a job in LA to book music acts for the show because they wanted more young people to watch. And so I ended up in LA, and that was a second opportunity for the greatest job in history because it was a talk show. In the days, it was 90 minutes, and they'd have what they call the author's slot. It wasn't just Julia Roberts. It would be, they'd put on famous authors. So I volunteered. And so all of a sudden I'm picking up the phone, meeting some of the greatest writers in the world. And, they didn't know I was a 22-year-old kid on the other end of the line, but I prepared the interview for Merv Griffin. And it was a tremendous opportunity because, again, you saw how the sausage is actually made. You have a fantasy, of one of my favorite writers was the guy, Tom Wolfe, who wrote The Right Stuff, and so many, he sort of changed journalism. And when I met him, he was going to be on the show. I call him, I go over to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel where he's staying. And he said, "Okay, did you read the book that he's promoting?" "Yeah, I read The Galleys. I read it." And he looks at me and he goes, "What'd you think? Is it any good?" And I go, I'm staring at the guy, seeing my whole career ending in this very, if I say the wrong thing. And I said, "You know what? It really is phenomenal. And I'll tell you my favorite parts." And I start telling him the parts that I liked. And he looked at me and he goes, "Wow, okay, I needed to hear that because my agent doesn't tell me the truth. The publisher doesn't tell me the truth. I just needed it outside. I've been working on this for 7 years, and I don't know if it sucks or it's any good." And the book was The Right Stuff, right, which became an international bestseller and a big movie. And that lesson never left me. Here's one of the most famous writers in the world, and he's looking at a 22-year-old kid saying, "Is my stuff any good?" And that never changes. If you're in a creative field, you're going to doubt yourself every day of the week. But the people that succeed are the people that keep pushing anyway, and people say, "Well, why would mine be any good?" And every giant that I have met, whether it's a film director or they have that same feeling. I was having lunch a couple of years ago with Lin-Manuel Miranda and his dad, and we were sitting around talking, and his dad kept asking me questions about High School Musical, right? All through lunch. So halfway through lunch, Lin-Manuel looks over at me and he goes, "What does a guy got to do to impress his dad? I got a Pulitzer, a Tony, a Grammy, and all he wants to talk about is High School Musical." And it's the same thing where he was funny, but he had that little thing. Well, what about me? And it's the nature of the creative endeavor, to be able to deal with your doubts. And that separates a lot of people out because when people tell them their stuff isn't any good, they might not go back and do the work to fix it. you know. So, but that's how I started, but I had the opportunity then to meet people. I encourage people to seek people who are doing what you want to do. And people love to talk about themselves, and if somebody's not a crazy person, and they will absolutely engage with you. If you write 10 emails, 10 letters, and you get two responses, those might be great responses. So I encourage people to do that.
Yeah. So, at the time when you were writing High School Musical, like, were you aware of, the other types of musical episodes that were being done on Disney at the time, and the amount of interest in that? Like, how did you kind of come up with this
Yes.
idea and
Okay.
base it on your family? Like, where did that all start?
I was aware of the other musical stuff by default because I was raising two daughters and they had the TV on constantly. They were 8 and 10 at the time, and it was on the house all the time, driving me crazy. The irony of that project then is at the time I was writing a pilot for Lifetime television about models, sex, drugs, and the wasteland of my life in the 1970s in New York. And I thought, okay, that's the can't miss of the century, this stuff. And I thought, but I'd love to write something that my kids could watch one time. And so here's how stuff happens. I'm in a meeting at Beacon Films. Um, I was working on action movies at the time, and the guy who ran the company wanted to be in every meeting, but he ran an hour late for everything, right? So I was sitting there talking to the two producers who I just met, and we were talking sports and we were talking music. As I said to you before, I loved music and I was a jock growing up. And they said, Disney would like to do a musical that boys will watch as well as girls. They've got the girls, but boys don't watch musicals. Maybe, if we had an athlete, could we come up with something? And it started in that room. Now, here's the irony of High School Musical, because again, we're going back when I wrote that was 2004. It was a different world than it is now. We're in a more inclusive, if the star quarterback at a high school wants to be in a school musical, nobody blinks an eye. Back in 2000, 2002, people would go crazy. What? You're an athlete. You're not So it was based on something real. And this is if you're in the creative field, in any field, pay attention to everything that ever happens to you because it's all material. When I was in high school playing basketball, I was on a bus one night on the team, and one of the best players who then went on as a football player to become quite famous, win 5 Super Bowls, MVP in a Super Bowl. But at the time we were high school kids, right? And he said to me, Bars, I'm going to tell you something. If you ever tell anybody this, I'm going to kill you. And I go, oh, that's an icebreaker. And he goes, well, you know what I always wanted to do? And I said, what did you always wanted to do? He said, I always wanted to be a ballet dancer. I said, what? He's
Ah,
the biggest jock, every college is chasing him. Everybody. He said, yeah, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. But in the neighborhood I grew up, he said, you want to be a ballet dancer, you got the hell beat out of you, different times. That was in the late 1960s, right? So he tells me that story. Now, fast forward to 30 something years. And I say, and we're talking to Disney. I said, well, what if the big man on campus, football star, the Tom Brady, who went to my same high school, wanted to be in the school musical. And they go, oh. And then instead of and when you need an idea, you do what all writers do, and that is rip off Shakespeare. And so instead of the Montagues and the Capulets, you said, okay, let's have the jocks and the drama geeks and the science and make that school. And so it started with that. Now, of course, the irony being when that first aired in 2006, it just exploded. It beyond what
yeah.
Disney had no idea how big it was going to get. On that, the Monday, it aired on a Friday. On the Monday when it came out, the thing that was just starting was texting. That was a technology that was just coming in, right? And the big phone companies were contacting Disney. Said, "What did you do? Something happened. What did you? Our texting numbers exploded into the millions. That we were in shock. What happened? You know?" And what was happening is girls were texting each other. Turn on Disney Channel. Zach's cute. You got to watch this. Zach Efron. Blah 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 blah. And so it took off by itself, and it just kept getting. It was unlike anything they'd ever had, because High School Musical at the time ended up worldwide with 600 million unique viewers, and for the Disney Channel movie to do that is, for them it was it changed their whole business model. Everything, a lot of things changed from that. But again, the when that happened, and here's my long-winded point, Ben, it was certainly not the first thing I'd ever written, but it's like, if you were a professional athlete, but you're on the bench for the Lakers, you're the 10th man, the 11th man, but you better practice as hard as LeBron James, because at the end of the season, LeBron might go down or somebody gets injured, and the coach looks down the bench and goes, "Hey, you're in now." So that when I got the opportunity to write that for Disney, I wasn't panicked, because I had written every day of my life from the time I was 15 till then. So I was ready to go. There's a lot of people who want to be writers. They just don't want to have to write, And so if you do the grind, again, whatever business you're in, be ready when the opportunity comes.
So, just like Peter, when you're writing it, right? How long did it take you to write the initial draft? And like when you submitted it to Disney, I mean, what kind of process was that like? Like, was there
I'll tell
some
you.
good feedback initially? Yeah.
Yeah,
How
and
did that
it
go?
was different than any other. Planets lined up for that project, which they have to do, and nobody does it themselves. A lot of things have to happen. But I wrote, first we went in and pitched the idea to one executive, a girl named Denise Carlson, and said, "Okay, here's what we're trying to do." Said, "Interesting, develop it some more, come back and pitch it to me and my next report." We went in, pitched it to them, and they go, "Okay, we liked it. You can write the first draft, And so I wrote the first draft in about 8 weeks, right? And turned it in. And, you sign a contract. We were going to do 3 drafts and a polish and blah, blah, blah. So I turned it in beginning of December of 2004, right? So early 2005, radio silence. We hear nothing. 8 weeks has gone by, which is usually the kiss of death. In the end, as a writer, you don't hear anything. They hate it. Then I get a phone call end of January 2005. Hey, they like your script. They want to give it to a director. They want to see if they can find a director. Well, Ben, that never happens. At the first draft, they basically green light. They just love the first draft. And at the same time, Kenny Ortega, who ended up directing it at the time, was sort of in director's jail doing Gilmore Girls and some other things. And he was looking to get back into the film side. And so they gave it to him. I met with Kenny. He liked it. And things started rolling. That project happened faster than anything I've ever done. Here's the other irony, though. Once they cast it and all that, and we thought, oh my God, this is great. Now, again, at the time, it was a big budget for Disney Channel, $4.2 million, whereas, Wonka that's out now, is 180 million, right, for a musical. But then for a little TV movie, it was a big budget. And the day before, or a week before they're going to start shooting, there's a contract period called pay or play. Whereas if you've hired Kenny Ortega or Zac Efron or whatever, if you go past this date, you have to pay them whether you make the movie or not, right? So we're right up against that deadline, and they're getting cold feet because this was a big budget for them. Musical, boys are going to laugh at it. Things could go, nobody knows, But then we're yelling at the the boss, saying, "You loved Grease. This will be Grease for another generation," by, doing all our BS, which you have to do. And they say, "Okay," so they go and shoot it. But so that was an unusual project that it took me 8 weeks, and they greenlit the first draft. Now we did some rewriting once they said we're going to do it, and you start working with the director, but that was unusual that it happened that quickly, and it was sort of the serendipity and the magic of High School Musical that it sort of was blessed from an early phase. So don't expect your first draft to get green lit, but in that case, it was a sort of meant to be, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So when you first, saw the different actors that they casted, and as well as like the music, did you, just for both of those, did you think that, wow, this is just an excellent soundtrack that's going to really add a lot to the movie? Like, these are the best actors for this, or were you like, oh, okay, these are good choices. I think that these people will do well, and the music's good, and it will help with the story that I created.
Yeah,
Like,
the
what was kind of
music
what were you
evolved because
thinking?
the music was written to fit the script. And so we had scenes, this song, we want to do here at this point, we want to do the basketball number, which turned out to be Get Your Head in the Game. So what Disney was very strong at is they had a fellow named Steve Vincent, who was their music supervisor. And because they were doing all those Disney Channel, Cheetah Girls, da-da-da movies, they had a big, big music department. And so you could walk down the hall and say, "This is the kind of song we're going to need here." And the most of the songs that we conceived of when we pitched the movie, they ended up creating. I'm not the songwriter. I only worked on the lyrics for one of the songs, the big cafeteria scene. But they had a lot of big songwriters, and one of them for High School Musical 3, a fellow named Adam Anders, who'd written big hit songs for a lot of big groups. He wrote a song for High School 3, which was a waltz number called "Can I Have This Dance?" That's in High School 3. I ended up working with him recently, on something else where he directed the movie. So stuff that started, we came in with ideas, but when we heard stuff early on, again, we said, that's next level. The song in High School 1, "Breaking Free," that Jamie Houston wrote, when we were shooting that, you could tell by the extras in the room, people were digging this song. And we go, something people at Disney, when they were sending the daily, was shot in Utah, and the dailies were coming back to Utah. They said people in the hallways wanted to come to the edit bay to look at the dailies and said, "This is cool." So there was things were happening. People work just as hard on bad movies as they do on good movies. You don't know. It's pretty scary, till you put it in front of the audience. But we had a pretty good feeling about it. Pretty good feeling.
Mhm. So once it comes out, the first one, and right, it has like, I think it was like
Yeah.
7.7 million viewers. Like, how did
Yes.
your life change? Like, was it really a drastic change right away? And like, how so?
Okay. Here's one thing that was drag. Everybody in Hollywood loves a winner. And when that exploded, my phone started ringing, from people who I couldn't get into their office a week before, right? And it changed my life a lot because it was an original screenplay, and I owned a piece then of all the merchandise and all the rights that came out of it. That rarely happens, but it was it was a little Disney Channel movie. They never had a success like that. It wasn't like their legal department was stupid, but all the rights, because of the Writers Guild of America, there's a thing called separated rights. Well, I retained a lot of the rights. And so in 2007, to give you an example, between High School Musical and the Miley Cyrus series that was on Hannah Montana, Disney did $2.7 billion in merchandise from those two properties. So even getting a little tiny piece of that changed my life in an economic way, fundamentally. And then other projects started coming again. When something's successful, it's, oh, I always loved that guy. I know that guy, and you just go, if you buy the BS, that, oh yeah, I'm such a smart guy, or you buy the BS, like, I don't know anything because I'm not selling anything. You can't do that. At Wimbledon, there's a sign over the men's locker room that, I forget, it was Keats or somebody who said, I'm paraphrasing it, you have to see victory and defeat as the same imposter, you know? And so that was a victory. Things, we started doing high school too. We started, they wanted to do high school 3 as a feature film, you know? And, and the thing that was surprising to everyone is how well it did around the world. Because at first they said it'll never play in England, in the UK, because high school is a totally different experience there. And yet it was almost bigger there than it was here. And kids, when we went over to do the premiere in September of 2006 for the English version, it's insanity. But then when we went back a year later to do high school too, Zac Efron had to have 6 bodyguards. He was so popular, So it was it was windy territory that, I was old enough, I'd been around the block enough to know it's not always going to be like this, enjoy it, enjoy that thing, because there'll be other things that succeed, but not like that. There'll be other things that fail, but that was a home run, grand slam. And one of the
So,
ironies is I named all the characters. My daughter's name is Gabriella, and my stepdaughter is
mhm.
Taylor, and my nephew is Jason, and my other niece is Kel. And so I had just named characters after them, saying, "Oh, they'll get to see a Disney Channel movie once," Again, who then had exploded around. So these kids were, when people found out they were named after them, they were little celebrities at their own schools. So,
So, in terms of like High School Musical 4, I mean, is there
yeah,
anything you can kind of speak to about that being created? I mean, I think 2016 there was some
yes.
sort of announcement. I haven't heard too much
There've
since.
been, yeah, here's what I can say. Um, there is tremendous interest on the part of the people who own the rights, being the Walt Disney Company, to do something for the 20th anniversary of High School Musical that would come out, and it will be contingent on a certain cast member being interested in doing that, because would be more expensive. But we've had discussions. People are willing to roll up their sleeves and do it if all the pieces can come together. So there may be, the people who created the movie didn't do the TV show version of High School Musical. That was a different entity. And though we had all taste of that, but it was a different entity. But if we do a High School 4, we're going to get the band back together and do the thing. And we have an idea for it, of what it would be. That's kind of cool. That's not just a victory lap, or because we wouldn't want to piss people off who said, "Oh my God, I invested my childhood in these 3 movies, and now they did this." So we don't want to do that. But so we're on the case. We'll see if it happens.
So, just the last question I have, Peter.
Sure.
So, right, you have the success with High School Musical 1, right, the original. How do you
Right.
maintain this drive and this passion to continually produce? That the second one was successful, the third one was
Yeah.
successful. Like, how do you
Yeah.
keep that same sort of level of discipline and drive once you already
Well,
have a success?
and the way you do that is, if you do it for free, then you're probably into it. As I say, I write every day, 6 days a week minimum, a lot of times 7, because I just like doing it. The real joy is in the process. And I think the way you continue to succeed is not try and succeed. It's just try and do the work. And, and I know this sounds a little bit like a cliche, but the results will take care of themselves. If you're legit and you're doing the work, you're going to have successes, you're going to have failures, but I don't need inspiration, because I feel lucky. I get to do that. I get to make a living doing that. and you hear somebody a lot smarter than me, like Warren Buffett, say, hey, if you're lucky enough to wake up in the morning and want to go do something, you make a living, you've won half the battle in life. The other half is family and health and personal things. But in terms of career, if your biggest success will be in something you just, Steve Jobs liked to fool around in the summer and pertaining to what I said before, Steve Jobs, he sent an email to David Packard of Hewlett Packard when he was, a kid, and said, "I really need this one part. Do you think you guys would give it to me?" And David Packard ended up invited him for a meeting, and here it is. You can make it. And so he just wanted to do that. So that's my thing is, yes, when you have kids and you do all that, you open your mail and you get all these bills, that's motivation. But to really have passion for something, it's something you would do whether you're getting paid. When people come to Hollywood and say, "Oh, I'm going to give it a year to become an actor or a writer," in the back of my mind, I go, "Bye bye," because people who can do something else won't go through what it takes to do that. you know. So it's kind of my
Right.
answer.
Good lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, Peter, I appreciate you coming on. Yeah, I think your story is great, and you give a lot of good lessons about discipline and focus and perseverance. And what you've done is, has brought a lot of joy to so many people. It's impacted people's lives. I mean, I'm one person that grew up with High School Musical and your creations. I think there's tons of people that it's been really impactful to them. And so I'm excited to see what you continue to do, whether it's the fourth one or other works that you create. And I appreciate you coming on.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And I'll be interested in following what you do.